You know, I debated whether I should do this video or not for actually quite some time. I've been looking at this saw and wanting just to slam it together because it really doesn't matter to me what the cause was. Let me turn that up before you guys figure it out. And because I've seen this in the past, this is not the first time. And I usually just don't show these things, kind of let them go away and hope that it's an anomaly, not the rule. But after a few years of this and seeing a few cases very similar to this, it's not an exception. It's actually probably a lot more common than people want to admit. And usually the blame goes to the saw, the manufacturer, like Husqvarna, because this was a modded saw, ported, decked, modded, and I guarantee the person who did it was pretty sure of their skills and their understanding of the process. Now, if you remember one of the videos I did recently, I talked about the one modification that can create a hand grenade. Does anyone remember what that was? Well, let's move on here. So when I took this apart, saw the carnage, I went through the similar analysis that most people would do. Oh, piston wore out. High enough hour saw where I guess it's not atypical to see a piston wear out, although that's a little interesting. I honestly don't think I've ever seen a 572 like this, and I'll get into it more, but I sure seen a number of steels in 372s with exactly this failure. So let's see if I can give you some clues. You take a look at that. Let's see if it will focus in on it. Figured it out yet? Take a look at the other side. Well, gee, it could be just a casting that's not so good. That's a Melee piston. They're very uniform. You can argue with the piston because the piston's what failed. But I'll tell you what begins to make you want to go a little deeper into it. It's when you have two components that failed, not just one. If it was just a piston, and I've seen them in the past where they broke the crown just like that, the ring snagged or something. And I'm going to throw another little detail in there. Around the time 2014-15, when I was doing 562s, I had gotten some cases where those were not flat. A couple 3,000 to 5,000 difference in the cases. And it's funny because when you'd squeeze down on the gasket, you could see that there was a difference. It squeezed them square pretty much, but there was a difference in the cases. And also, magically, around the same period of time, they were having piston crown failures. And then, I don't know, after a period of time, Husky does what they always do, and I never saw that again. It was just a few saws. And the new short blocks I put in there were nice and square on the top. They didn't have any of that mismatch at the sealing surface. So, in the other video I'd done that got some blowback from the experts is talking about bore alignment. Because I had seen some aftermarket cylinders that were really hyped up and they kept blowing up in a similar failure. And when I finally mic'd it out, I realized that they were pretty much out of alignment, the bore relative to the flange. I'm going to tell you, there is a lot more of this happening than any of the people who are in the business of selling the concept of modded saws want to tell you. And then when I pulled the gasket off of this one, look what I found. If this was the only time I'd seen this, I would say it was an anomaly. Maybe wouldn't have connected the dots. But it's one of the reasons why on my channel I got away from turning cylinders for video purposes and went to a thin gasket on these things. They start out with a 30 thousandths gasket. So you put a 15 thousandths or 12 thousandths gasket in there, you get effectively the same results of turning the base without introducing that variable of, is that bore now square to that base you just turned? Now, I guarantee you the guy who did this will swear up and down that it's more true now than it was when it came from the factory. And I'm going to tell you that there are a lot of people who'll mouth that kind of thing, but just simply don't understand fixed ring tolerances, the whole process. They just don't. And there's a couple of guys who've got some new channels they've started up over the last couple of years, and there's an awful lot of bling. And they're getting into this stuff and reinventing the wheel. And you can just tell from the way they talk about it and show it, they have no idea. They wouldn't even know what to look for. So that's why I did this video. So now you know what to look for. When you're in the hobby, before you want to start selling your services, you get a bunch of saws built and test them, because that is what I did. Is I went through a research and development phase where I would develop a build and a way to replicate the build, and then I'd run them with loggers and stuff before I actually said, hey, I'll do something for you. And by that time, had sorted out not just the geometry I was trying to recreate in the cylinder or changing the compression, but also how to replicate it. And my first, this thing here is very old. My first attempt to solve what I thought was a really key issue was buying this plate right here. This is what you bolt a lathe chuck onto, and this threads onto the spindle. And I bolted a spindle on it, got that all tight. I turned that to a slip fit after threading that onto the spindle of the lathe. And even after doing that, I still got a couple of 2-3 thousandths run out. Not much. And that's because that's what you get with the slop and the bearing in the lathe, where the spindle of the lathe has a little bit of play. And then that's projected out. So now you have all that distance to magnify that 1 thousandths turns into 3 thousandths. In this case, half a thousand turns into 1 or 2 thousandths. And then once I did that, the cylinders I was producing with a decent surface finish, I didn't see any asymmetric wear. So I realized that I had come up with a solution to that problem for my hobby saws. And I knew I could replicate that, where if a person hired me to do it, I was going to give them a cylinder that was actually, the bore was probably as true to the flange as the one they bought from the factory, and better some of the aftermarket ones. So I've advanced that. I'm not going to show you that. I've been burned before on showing tools. But that basic concept is just really common sense. It's taking away variables and taking away the points of contact to the part you're going to machine, so that you have less chance of movement, less chance of, shifts. Therefore, the cylinder being moved a little bit off center from the bore when you make your final cut. So I guess the point is, unless a person has got the time into this process and the machining skills, done the research, you really got to think about it before you spend money. It's not about they give it back to you and it feels really snappy, at first. I mean, if you're a hobby guy, it's your saw. It doesn't really freaking matter, does it? Run it until it blows up and make another one. After a while, you develop your process. But if you want to sell your services, you better at least match what I've got right here, if not do better. Because when you start getting those modified saws out into the real world where people actually use them, expecting that increase in performance, and you produce something like this, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I'm telling you, there's an awful lot of guys out there who really can't do any better than what you're looking at right here. I'm also going to tell you that the reason why this saw failed was because of that machining operation right there. That's what killed the saw. Not a bad piston, not because it's a Husqvarna 572 and what other online mythology gets spread around by people who do this kind of work and would rather build a red herring to take the focus off the fact that they modded a saw and created a hand grenade. And if you're a dealer and you pull apart a saw and see that, that is not a saw to warranty. Whatever failed, it was because whoever did this build, you know, if you see this kind of a failure and you see this kind of work, even if it looks like good on the surface finish and you start seeing failures like this, the first thing you go to is bore alignment. Now, let me tell you some other things I've seen happen from bad bore alignment. I've seen the bottom end bearing there fail. I've also seen these fail. Guess what? This bore alignment was bad enough it not only took out the piston, but it did take out the bearing. So, what was the chicken and what was the egg? Well, I can tell you it had nothing to do with being Husqvarna brand. It had nothing to do with a 572. It had certainly nothing to do with being Autotune. It had everything to do with somebody with a combination of ignorance and arrogance who sold a service to a man that produced a less than reliable saw. I have a hunch we're going to see this a couple more times. Yeah, I think we will. I bought another one of these saws and it has some of the same characteristics. And took a perfectly good saw and turned it into something that wasn't going to last or survive the pro life. And the shame is the person who I bought this from is pretty sure it was because of Husqvarna. And hopefully by now you figured out it had nothing to do with Husqvarna. It had everything to do with whoever did this work. Blamed it on Husqvarna. And like I said, this is the kind of stuff that a dealer is going to see. This is the kind of stuff that I've seen over the years, debugging why something failed. And this is why you've got to be so careful on who you select to work on your saws or modify your saws. And if you're paying them money. But I'm going to repeat, if you're doing your own stuff, who cares? You just develop a little better technique and learn how to do it. And after a while, you know, you'll get it where it's true enough, where it runs long enough that you're going to have your fun. And hopefully this will be informative. Hopefully for the guys who want to develop their skills, they'll understand that this is one of the 800-pound gorillas in the room when you do saw mods, if you want to raise compression. And I'm going to tell you the other big animal in the room is heat. Is how do you get rid of heat? When you increase power, you increase compression, you increase RPMs, you have more material going through that saw to burn, there's more heat. And it's kind of like the big trucks in the Rocky Mountains. You got to have a big radiator to keep that thing at a constant temperature. Guess what? When you're working a saw, not just doing cookies and racing and stuff like that, but when you're out working and now you get dirt in the fins and stuff like that, you add this kind of crap to additional heat in the cylinder, and the cooling system that comes stock with the saw is just basically a fan, right, on the flywheel, blowing air through these fins. That gets compromised, and then you also have added an increased amount of compression. Man, why is anyone surprised when these things happen like this, where you have a blow up? I think this one was not due to just the heat. I think this was simply due to the bore alignment issue that was generated by whoever machined the base of the cylinder. And the evidence is, again, the asymmetric wear in the piston, which is fairly obvious when you look at it. And this side load on that crankshaft. It's a testament to the strength of these crankshaft assemblies in my mind, actually. So anyway, there's my rant for the day. Take it or leave it. I really don't care. But I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. There's an awful lot of people out there who should never be inside a saw. I know that sounds arrogant, but there's also a lot of people who really are trying to learn and having fun. And yeah, they should do that. I don't see a problem with that. I went through the process. And if you know that this could be an issue, you could actually develop your skills to do a good job, you know, and maybe after a year or two of building and developing and having them tested and run, seeing what fails, then yeah, you'll be one of the good guys out there who sells a service that is actually supported and backed up with research and development and understanding of the process. But I will end the video on that note and say that the two big elephants in the room, one's a gorilla, one's an elephant, heat, bore alignment to the guys who do the saw modifications. I guess there's another one too, but I'm not going to go there today. And that's the ability of the carburetor to feed a motor that's turning more RPMs. But that's a discussion for another day. So